Shalom. Welcome to today's deep dive.
Yeah.
Imagine you are, strapped into a roller coaster. You're slowly clicking your way up to this massive 300-foot drop.
Oh, that agonizing buildup.
Right. Your palms are sweating. Your heart is literally hammering against your ribs. Every instinct in your body is just screaming at you that you are about to die.
And yet you willingly got in the seat.
Exactly. And when you reach the bottom of that drop, you'll laugh at you. You actually paid money for this experience. Why on earth does the human brain actively seek out terror just to feel good?
It is such a fascinating paradox.
It really is. And if you are listening to this, I am speaking directly to you today, an adult seeker of truth. You are someone who looks at the world with all its chaotic beauty and wants to understand the deeper reality behind it all.
You're exploring faith, but you want real answers.
Yes. Answers that bridge the gap between human biology and spiritual reality. You want to know how the wiring in your head connects to the design of the Creator?
It is wonderful to be here with you to do exactly that. It really is a privilege to explore these profound questions today.
I'm so glad you're here. Our mission today is to synthesize a stack of sources spanning neurobiology, psychology, and Christian theology. We're going to uncover how you are wonderfully designed to process fear, face real-world oppression, and tap into a radical, unconquerable joy.
Not just a fleeting good mood, right?
Joy is a literal biological shield and a spiritual weapon. But to understand how we handle real-world darkness, we have to start with that roller coaster. Or, like a scary movie.
The simulated darkness.
Yeah, we actively seek out fake darkness. In psychology, there is a term for this, right? Counterhedonic consumption.
Yes, seeking out a negative stimulus for pleasure.
It sounds completely backwards. What is happening in our heads when a jump scare happens on a movie screen?
Well, it seems entirely counterintuitive because fear is fundamentally an evolutionary survival mechanism. Its only job is to keep you alive.
It's not supposed to be fun?
Exactly. When your brain detects danger, it doesn't wait for you to think about it. It relies on the amygdala, which is this tiny almond-shaped structure deep in the temporal lobe.
The brain's alarm system.
Yes, a lightning-fast alarm system. Within 120 milliseconds of hearing a scream or seeing a terrifying image long before you're conscious, thinking mind even registers what you were looking at, the amygdala has already pulled the fire alarm.
Wait, 120 milliseconds?
Less than a fraction of a second, yeah.
So my body is reacting before I even know I'm scared.
Precisely. It immediately signals your hypothalamus to dump adrenaline and cortisol directly into your bloodstream.
Wow.
Your heart rate spikes to pump oxygen to your extremities, your breathing gets shallow, your pupils dilate to take in more light. You are in full fight or flight mode.
Ready to battle a predator or sprint for your life? Okay, let's unpack this. If my amygdala is flooding my body with adrenaline that fast, and I am biologically prepped to fight a bear, why don't I, rip off my 3D glasses and sprint out of the movie theater?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. What is stopping me from literally fleeing?
What's fascinating here is the role of your brain's high-level management, specifically the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, or VMPFC for short.
The VMPFC.
Okay. While your amygdala is screaming, the VMPFC takes a fraction of a second longer to assess the context. It looks around and says, wait, I smell popcorn. I feel a soft chair.
The threat is on a flat screen.
Exactly. It applies the brakes to your panic by creating what psychologists call a protective frame.
A protective frame. It's like a mental safety net.
Precisely. It's a psychological boundary that tells your body that this is just a drill. And because that protective frame is there, you don't run.
You sit there and enjoy it.
Right. You get to experience the massive chemical reward of surviving a life-threatening encounter without actually being in danger. Your brain releases dopamine and endorphin.
Which are natural painkillers, right?
Yes, leaving you feeling euphoric. Theories like threat simulation theory or benign masochism suggest this is how we safely practice resilience.
Like taking our nervous system to the gym.
Yes. We are playing with our biological boundaries in a zero-risk environment to practice handling stress.
So the prefrontal cortex saves us when we are sitting safely on the couch. But my question is, what happens to our biology when the couch isn't safe?
That is where things get serious.
Yeah, what happens when that protective frame is completely stripped away? And the threat isn't a movie, but a truly toxic boss, a tyrant, or a malicious abuser in your real life.
That changes the dynamic entirely. The psychological and spiritual stakes become absolute. When the threat is real, you can't just rely on the prefrontal cortex to tell you it's a movie.
Because it's not.
Right. To understand how to survive and defeat this kind of real-world malice, we first have to dissect the psychology of the oppressor.
Okay, let's get into that.
Clinical psychology reveals that the core motive of abusers is power and control. But beneath that exterior of dominance, they are almost always profoundly psychologically insecure.
Insecure? I mean, that is hard to believe when you are on the receiving end of someone who acts like they hold all the cards. They project absolute power.
They project it, yes, but they don't actually possess it internally. Think of the abuser like a parasite that cannot produce its own body heat.
Oh, wow. That's a vivid image.
It literally has to siphon warmth from a host to survive. In this case, the warmth is your fear, your anxiety, and your emotional breakdown.
Because they're empty inside.
Exactly. They use the victim's suffering as a mirror of power. When they make you terrified or confused, they look at your reaction and say, look at the effect I am having. I must be powerful.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If their entire goal is to feed off my fear and siphon my reaction, then fighting back with explosive anger or begging or panicking, that just plays right into their hand.
It does, completely.
I am still acting as their mirror. I am giving them the reflection of power they crave. So how do we win? It sounds like we need some sort of emotional judo, flipping their weight against them.
I want to be careful with that analogy.
Oh, why is that?
Judo implies you are actively trying to grapple and throw the other person. You are still engaged in their game on their terms. Ah, I see what you mean.
What we are talking about here is stepping off the mat entirely. In psychology, this is achieved through mechanisms called active surrender and secondary control.
Active surrender. I mean, that sounds a lot like just giving up.
It is the exact opposite of passive victimhood. Active surrender means radically claiming your inner territory.
Okay, claiming your inner territory. How does that look in practice?
It is recognizing what you cannot control, namely, the abuser's toxic behavior, and violently shifting your locus of control to the one thing you can govern, which is your internal response.
Right.
When an oppressor tries to gaslight you or intimidate you, and you respond with deep, unshakable inner peace, you drop your emotional temperature to zero.
The parasite freezes out.
Exactly. You completely shatter their mirror of power.
Because they look for their reflection of dominance, and they just see, well, peace. They see a soul they cannot manipulate.
And the mechanism that follows is entirely predictable. When a victim refuses to provide that fear, the abuser experiences a severe dopamine crash.
Because their tactic totally failed. Yes. This triggers what clinicians call narcissistic rage. They panic, often escalating their behavior temporarily because the twisted logic of their entire psychological framework is collapsing.
They are coming face to face with their own impotence. That is wild. And this maps so beautifully onto the theology we are looking at.
It really does.
In the book of Ephesians, peace isn't described as sitting cross-legged on a mountain. It is described as armor. It is the footwear of a soldier. It is a highly offensive weapon.
An offensive weapon.
By relying on God's sovereignty, which is the ultimate form of secondary control, trusting that the Creator holds the universe so you develop an unconquerable soul.
That is a beautiful way to phrase it.
You are signaling to the oppressor, you can touch my circumstances, but you have no access to my spirit.
It creates a boundary that malice simply cannot cross. But if this weaponized peace is the shield that shatters the abuser's mirror, we have to ask, what fills the space left behind in your own soul?
The answer is true joy.
Yes. But we must be incredibly precise here, because we have to distinguish the divine reality of joy from the twisted, counterfeit satisfaction the oppressor feels when they exert control.
Right, because the abuser is clearly feeling something they would call happiness when they are dominating someone. They get a thrill out of it.
They get a thrill, but it is a dark counterfeit known psychologically as malicious pleasure.
Malicious pleasure.
This encompasses things like schadenfreude, taking pleasure in another's misfortune, or gloating. We see this heavily in individuals exhibiting the dark triad personality traits.
Which are narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism.
Exactly. Machiavellianism, for instance, is a worldview where you see other human beings merely as chess pieces to be manipulated for your own gain.
Just objects to be used.
Yes, and here's what is happening neurologically. When you view people as objects, your brain stops releasing oxytocin, the bonding hormone. You chemically isolate yourself.
So you feel nothing.
Right. So to feel anything at all, you have to extract a cheap dopamine hit through cruelty.
That makes me think of the brilliant story in St. Augustine's Confessions.
Oh, the pear tree.
Yes. He writes about a time when he was a teenager, and he and his friends stole a massive haul of pears from a neighbor's tree in the middle of the night.
And he wasn't even hungry.
Exactly. He specifically points that out. The pears weren't even ripe. They were terrible. He ended up just throwing them to the pigs. Augustine realized he didn't enjoy the fruit. He enjoyed the sin of stealing itself.
He enjoyed the illusion of autonomy.
Yeah, a twisted imitation of God's power. It was the thrill of breaking a rule just to feel omnipotent for 5 minutes.
That is a perfect illustration. Thomas Aquinas later built on Augustine's idea, explaining the mechanism behind it. He noted that this kind of malicious pleasure stems from a profound spiritual vacuum.
Because they're disconnected from the source of life.
Precisely. Because the abuser is disconnected, they develop a sensual addiction to power. And just like a chemical dependency, tolerance builds. The dopamine receptors downregulate.
So they need more and more.
The oppressor needs more control, more cruelty, just to maintain the same baseline feeling, which ultimately leads to a severe rebound effect, an emotional crash, and the death of their own soul.
Okay, so their joy is a fake, addictive dopamine loop that leaves them completely hollow.
Exactly.
I have to ask on behalf of the listener, what is the actual biological and spiritual reality of true joy? Because if I am facing real hardship, I don't want toxic positivity.
No, nobody wants.
I don't want to just slap a fake smile on a terrible situation. What makes true joy different from the oppressor's thrill?
This raises an important question, and the distinction is found in the biological mechanism itself. Malicious pleasure isolates and consumes. True joy expands and connects.
Expands and connects. I like that.
When you experience genuine joy, and particularly when you share authentic laughter with someone, your brain releases a life-giving chemical cascade.
What's in that cascade?
You get dopamine for motivation, serotonin to stabilize your mood, and critically, that oxytocin we mentioned earlier. It builds deep, profound trust and empathy.
The biology of laughter is wild. I was reading that genuine joy literally lowers cortisol, the stress hormone that ravages your body.
It does. It has measurable physical effects.
And it actually activates something called natural killer cells in your immune system.
Yes, NK cells. When you experience deep joy, your brain literally signals your bone marrow to release these white blood cells.
That's amazing.
Their specific job in the body is to hunt down and destroy tumor cells and virally infected cells. Finding joy is not ignoring reality. It is actively boosting your physical immunity down to the cellular level.
So it perfectly embodies the ancient wisdom of Proverbs 17.22. A joyful heart is good medicine.
It isn't just a metaphor, it is literal cellular medicine.
And theologically, joy is described as a fruit of the Spirit. It is the natural byproduct of a soul connected to its creator.
Absolutely. The theologian Karl Barth made a stunning observation about this. He said that genuine laughter is the closest thing humans have to God's grace.
Wow. Laughter is grace.
He called it a reality-based optimism. It is the profound ability to look directly at the brokenness, the oppression, and the chaos of the world and still laugh.
Not because you are ignoring the pain.
Right, but because you know the final outcome of the story is already eternally secure.
That is beautiful. Okay, so we understand that this true joy is both a biological superweapon and a spiritual reality. But how do you and I practically get it?
It's the daily practice that matters.
Yeah, because if I am dealing with anxiety or a toxic environment, I can't just snap my fingers and magically possess an unconquerable soul. How do we cultivate this?
It requires intentionality and practice. The mind is plastic. It can be rewired. This kind of resilient joy is built through consistent spiritual disciplines.
Like reading scripture.
Yes, internalizing truth in scripture so your brain defaults to hope rather than panic. Engaging in honest, raw prayer, which clinical psychology recognizes as a highly effective method for emotional regulation.
Because it allows you to process trauma rather than burying it.
Precisely. And crucially, it requires community.
Ah, community. That is where mirror neurons come into play, right?
You're exactly right.
I know in social psychology, when I look at you and you are smiling genuinely, the motor neurons in my own brain that are responsible for smiling literally light up. My brain simulates your joy.
Yes, we are biologically wired to co-regulate our nervous systems with safe, loving people. You literally catch their peace like a contagious healing agent.
That's incredible.
But there is another vital mechanism for cultivating this inner resilience, and it is the practice of experiencing awe.
Ah, like standing in an old-growth forest or being at the edge of the ocean or looking up at the Milky Way on a perfectly clear night.
Yes, exactly that feeling.
You get that physical sensation, your chest expands, you take a deep breath, and you just feel incredibly small, but in a good way. Psychologists call it perceived vastness. which creates a small self.
And that small self has nothing to do with poor self-esteem or self-hatred. It is about ego reduction.
Putting things in perspective.
Right. When you stand under the Milky Way, your personal anxieties, your deadlines, the toxic person at work, they suddenly shrink in comparison to the sheer grandeur of the universe. Your perspective is radically realigned.
And the biological payoff for that realignment is staggering. When we feel that deep breath under the stars, what we are actually feeling is our body healing.
The physical data on awe is just amazing.
It really is. Experiencing awe literally reduces pro-inflammatory cytokines in your bloodstream, specifically a protein called interleukin-6.
Yes, interleukin-6.
When that is chronically high, you feel that tight, stressed, inflamed feeling, which is linked to depression and heart disease. Standing in awe of the Creator's work physically drops that inflammation. Your body heals when your ego shrinks.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the theology here is profound. Scott Hosey describes nature as God's glory robe.
God's glory robe, I love that.
The beauty of the earth is an overflow of the Creator's own artistry. When you experience that awe, it triggers a mechanism that C.S. Lewis famously described using the German word Sehnsucht. It translates roughly to a holy longing or a piercing, romantic ache for another world.
Right. Lewis said that if we find in ourselves a desire that no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that we were made for another world.
Precisely. That Sehnsucht resolves our deepest existential dread. It answers our fear of death, our fear of meaninglessness, and our fear of isolation by viscerally reminding us that we are part of a grand, eternal story.
We are part of something so much bigger.
And we see this mapped out in modern psychology through the PERMA model for human flourishing.
Right, the PERMA model. That's positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment.
Yes. Neuroscience shows us that when you actively cultivate positive emotions like awe, when you engage deeply in your present moments, when you build trusting relationships that fire those mirror neurons.
When you attach your life to a higher meaning, and when you accomplish small acts of obedience.
Exactly. You are literally paving new neural pathways. And if you look closely at those 5 pillars of the PERMA model, they are the exact psychological equivalent of bearing the fruit of the Spirit.
That's a huge connection.
Living a life surrendered to God isn't a restriction. It is the ultimate optimal design for human flourishing.
So what does this all mean? We started with the fake fear of a roller coaster and a movie, and moved to the very real fear of an oppressor. We synthesize it all here. By being obedient in the small things, laying down our need for control, releasing our petty anger, we train our nervous system.
They really do.
We stop reacting to the world with the amygdala's terrified fight-or-flight panic,
Yeah.
and we start responding with the prefrontal cortex and the Spirit's grace.
Yeah.
We actively build what we could call an inner Eden.
An inner Eden, yes.
And once that garden of peace and joy is planted in your soul, no oppressor, no anxiety, and no tyrant can uproot it.
That is the ultimate emotional judo. You step off the mat of their malice, and you step into the reality of God's design.
Think about the protective frame we discussed at the very beginning with scary movies. The reason you can enjoy the thrill is because your brain knows you are safe on the couch.
Right.
What if your faith in God's ultimate sovereignty is the ultimate protective frame for reality? If you truly believe the Creator of the universe holds your future, then even the darkest, most terrifying moments of life are just scenes in a story where the victory has already been secured.
The monster on the screen cannot actually get your soul.
Exactly. How would viewing your life through that lens change the way you face tomorrow's challenges?
That is a perspective that changes absolutely everything. It turns fear into awe, and it allows you to truly live.
Thank you so much for joining us on this profound exploration of the mind and spirit. Keep seeking the truth, keep looking for the awe, and keep cultivating that inner Eden.